justify, not to defend, but because somewhere out there, someone is holding in a scream. Someone is carrying the shame of a choice they never thought they'd make. And maybe, just maybe, they need to know they're not alone. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, because the stories you're afraid to tell are the ones we tell best. I was 34. No kids. 9 years married. And most days, I felt like a ghost in my own life. It wasn't always like that. Derek and I had our beginnings like anyone else. College sweethearts. Long phone calls. Secret notes on car dashboards. Sunday mornings tangled up in each other like the world couldn't touch us. But time has a way of softening things that once felt sharp. And trying to have a baby, month after month, year after year, turned everything between us into something fragile. At first, it was hope that carried us. Appointments, tests, vitamins, more tests, prayers, tears, trying again. And again. And again. Then, it became silence. Not the kind that soothes, the kind that smothers. Derek stopped looking me in the eye when he spoke. He buried himself in work, overtime shifts, meetings that ran late, projects he never used to bring home. He never said it out loud, but I could feel it. Shame wrapped around him like a second skin. Male infertility. 2 words that stole the light from his smile and replaced it with something distant. We stopped trying. Not because we gave up, but because trying started to feel like punishment. And that's when Malik started coming around more. Malik, he was the kind of man people notice when he walks into a room. Not just because he's tall or handsome, but because he looks at you, really looks like you matter. Like you're not just filling space. He and Derek had been friends since they were kids. Groomsmen at our wedding. Uncle Malik to our future children, the ones who never came. He'd just gone through a divorce. Said the silence in his house was louder than the arguments ever were. So we let him in. At first, it was casual football nights, helping Derek with the backyard, checking in on me when I wasn't answering texts. But slowly, the spaces he filled became the spaces Derek had left empty. He'd ask me how I was doing and wait for the answer. He'd notice when I wore something new. He'd bring my favorite lemon muffins just because and pretend it wasn't a big deal, but it was. It was everything. I didn't see it for what it was at first. I told myself he was just kind. That I was just lonely. That it was harmless. But it wasn't harmless. Because I started looking forward to him, watching the clock when Derek said he'd be late, hearing the doorbell and hoping it was Malik. I'd set 2 extra plates at dinner without thinking. I'd tidy the living room like it mattered. And when he'd laugh at something I said, even something small, it felt like air rushing into lungs that hadn't taken a full breath in months. One evening, we were cleaning up after dinner. Derek had fallen asleep early on the couch, TV humming in the background. Malik stood beside me, drying dishes. I dropped a plate. It shattered. I bent to pick up the pieces and cut my finger. He reached out, gently took my hand, and said, "You've been holding everything together for too long." I froze. He wasn't talking about the plate. He was talking about me. And in that moment, something shifted. I pulled my hand back, laughed it off, blamed the wine. But the truth is, that was the first time I realized just how seen I'd been feeling around him, and how invisible I'd felt everywhere else. That night, I lay in bed beside Derek, his back turned, breathing slow and even. I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question I never thought I'd ask. How long can love survive when it's starving? The walls of our home were quiet, but they echoed with everything we didn't say. Every room had a story that never got written. An empty nursery at the end of the hallway, painted yellow, hopeful once, now just a door we kept shut. And Malik? He started knocking more often, checking in, bringing things, staying longer. And I started opening the door every time. It was a Thursday night. Just one of those normal, nothing special kind of evenings. Derek had suggested we invite Malik over for dinner. Said it had been a while and the game was on. I made pasta. Nothing fancy. Just something warm. Comfort food. The kind of meal you make when you're not trying to impress, but you still want someone to feel cared for. We sat around the table, the three of us, like we'd done so many times before. Derek talked about work. Malik joked about how we needed to adopt him because he missed home-cooked meals. I smiled, poured more wine, and tried not to look too hard at the way Malik's eyes lingered on mine, just a second longer than usual. It was subtle. Barely there. But when you've been starving for attention, even crumbs feel like a feast. Somewhere between refilling plates and wiping sauce off the edge of the counter, Malik made a joke about having kids. Something casual. Something light-hearted. I laughed, but it caught in my throat. Then he looked at me. Really looked. And the joking stopped. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The way his eyes softened, it felt like he was asking something without saying the words. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a wife stuck in limbo. I felt like a woman. A whole woman. Seen. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I still was. Derek barely noticed. He was halfway into the game, nodding absently, already emotionally elsewhere. The night moved on, dishes were cleared, and Malik left with a warm smile and a hug that lasted one heartbeat longer than it should have. But I didn't forget that look. I carried it with me. 2 days later, Derek had to travel for work, just overnight. He left early, kissed my forehead like a brother would, and reminded me to lock the door behind him. That evening, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat in the kitchen, lights dim, half a meal still sitting cold on the stove. I didn't expect anyone. I didn't even want company. Then the doorbell rang. It was Malik. He smiled like he hadn't planned it, but something about him told me he had. Said he was just passing by, thought he'd drop off a book he'd mentioned the other night. Something about second chances and starting over. I let him in without thinking. We sat on the couch. No TV. No distractions. Just the kind of quiet that dares you to say things you shouldn't. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. Then I said no. And the tears came before I could stop them. I told him I was tired. Not physically, but in the kind of way your soul gets tired after waiting for something that never shows up. I said I didn't know who I was anymore. That I felt like a house with all the lights off, waiting for someone to come home. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me to be strong. He just listened. And then he shared. He talked about his divorce. About watching someone fall out of love with him and not knowing how to stop it. About how lonely it feels to lie next to someone and still feel like a stranger. There was this moment, so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, when he looked at me and said, "You still want a child, don't you?" I froze. He wasn't judging. He wasn't fishing. He was just asking. I nodded. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice barely above a whisper. And he said, "If you ever decide you want to do this, you wouldn't have to do it alone. I'd help you. I'd give you that. No strings. No expectations." My heart stopped. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was terrifying. Because I didn't know what else to do. I told him he was crazy. That he didn't mean that. That he'd had too much wine. But he just looked at me and said, "I mean it." He didn't touch me. He didn't move closer. He just sat there, letting the weight of his offer hang in the room like smoke. When he left, I stood by the door long after it closed. I replayed it over and over in my mind. The words, the tone, the look in his eyes. And somewhere deep inside me, a part of me hoped he wouldn't take it back. After that night, nothing between us changed on the surface. There were no confessions. No lingering touches. But inside me, everything was different. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. About the offer that didn't come wrapped in romance, but something heavier. Something that sounded a lot like salvation. I kept telling myself it was insane, that it wasn't real, that he'd take it back if I brought it up again. But he didn't. And I didn't bring it up, because I didn't want him to take it back. I started replaying that night over and over in my mind, like a song stuck on repeat. His voice, the softness in it, the stillness in the room when he said those words, and the way a part of me felt something light up. Not lust, not thrill, just hope, a dangerous, fragile kind of hope. And it broke me, because it wasn't just a baby I was aching for. It was meaning. It was mattering. It was the chance to finally feel like something inside me was growing, not dying. Every time I saw the empty nursery, I'd picture a crib filled with warmth instead of dust. And sometimes, late at night, I'd close my eyes and see a little boy with soft brown curls and Malik's eyes. I'd jolt awake, my chest tight, shame crawling up my spine like fire. Because how could I dream of something like that? How could I imagine building something sacred on the ruins of something sacred? I started avoiding the nursery altogether. I buried myself in distractions, rearranged furniture that didn't need moving, cleaned the fridge twice a week, folded laundry with military precision. Because if I kept moving, I didn't have to sit with the truth. But truth doesn't wait to be invited. It lives under your skin. It whispers when you're alone. It flares up when your husband walks past you in the hallway and doesn't notice you're crying. Derek, he tried. In his own way. But I think he was grieving too. Not just the baby we never had, but the woman I used to be. The woman who laughed easily. Who touched him without hesitation. Who didn't flinch when he said, maybe we should take a break from trying. But I wasn't her anymore. And I think he didn't know how to love the version of me that was left. I started looking forward to Malik's messages. A photo of a new recipe. A meme. A song. Simple things. But they made me feel remembered. He never brought it up again. The offer. But every time his name lit up on my phone, my heart did something I couldn't control. And that scared me. Because I was still married. Still wearing the ring. Still pretending that time and prayers would heal what silence had stolen. I started asking myself questions I never thought I'd ask. Was God testing me, or was he sending me a lifeline? Had I been so wrapped in grief that I stopped believing joy could still find me? Was it betrayal to want something so badly, you'd take it from the wrong hands? I cried a lot in the shower. It was the only place I could let the tears fall without having to explain them. The water would drown out the sobs. And for those few minutes, I didn't have to be strong. I didn't have to smile. I didn't have to pretend. Some nights, I'd lie awake beside Derek, his breathing steady, his arm flung over to my side of the bed out of habit, and I'd stare at the ceiling, trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Not needed. Wanted. And in the quiet, I'd hear Malik's voice in my head. You wouldn't have to do this alone. And it would undo me all over again. I wasn't ready to say yes. But I was no longer sure how to keep saying no. Malik never mentioned it again, at least not directly. But things shifted. Not in grand, obvious ways. In quiet, deliberate ones. One morning, a package showed up on the doorstep. No note. Just a box. Inside were 3 books. All on parenting, fertility, and navigating motherhood solo. I didn't need to check the label. I knew it was from him. Later that day, he texted. Saw these and thought of you. No pressure. Just. In case. My hands trembled as I held the books. I stared at them for a long time before putting them on the shelf, spine out, tucked between old cookbooks and forgotten self-help titles. But I knew exactly where they were. A few days later, he sent me a list of clinics. Fertility specialists. Some local. Some not. All highly rated, discreet, compassionate. He'd done the research. And again, his message was gentle. You don't have to look now. Just, for when you're ready to hope again. Hope. That word. I didn't realize how foreign it had become to me until he handed it back so carefully. Malik didn't push. He didn't hover. but he became a steady presence, a quiet hum in the background of my days. Like a lighthouse I didn't know I'd been drifting toward. And I started drifting further. Not in lust. Not in scandal. In longing. I found myself imagining things I hadn't let myself picture in years. Not bedrooms or sheets or stolen moments, but cribs. First birthdays. Laughter in the hallway. I imagined sitting in a rocking chair with a baby pressed against my chest. A soft coo. A tiny hand wrapped around my finger. And in those dreams, the child didn't have Derek's eyes. They had Malik's. And when I'd wake, guilt would hit me like a wave. But it never washed it all away. Because underneath the shame was something else. Peace. Like my heart had found a place to rest, even if just in fantasy. Then one afternoon, Malik asked if we could meet for coffee. I told Derek I was going to the market. He barely looked up from his laptop. The cafe was quiet, tucked in a corner of town no one we knew would pass through. I spotted him by the window. A soft smile, a book in hand. That easy presence that made it feel like nothing was wrong, even when everything was. I sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said it. I meant what I said. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. I see how empty this waiting has made you. I looked away. Because he was right. And hearing it out loud felt like being cracked open. I wanted to tell him to stop. To take it back. To leave it alone. But I didn't. I nodded. Barely. Just enough for him to know I'd heard him. That a part of me wasn't resisting anymore. He reached across the table. Not bold, not inappropriate. Just enough to brush his fingers against mine. Warm. Grounded. Real. And I let him. It wasn't about desire. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about being touched. Being held in someone's gaze like I still mattered. And I knew, in that moment, that something inside me had shifted forever. When I got home, Derek barely noticed I'd been gone. Dinner was cold. The lights were off. He was in the study, pretending to be busy. We didn't fight. We didn't speak. But there was something colder between us than silence. Distance doesn't always show up in slammed doors. Sometimes, it's the way someone stops asking how your day was. The way they stop reaching for you in their sleep. And in that silence, I kept returning to that table at the cafe. To Malik's eyes. His voice. His hands. Not in lust, but in relief. I told myself I was just exploring my options. That I hadn't committed to anything. That I hadn't done anything wrong. But the truth? When I let his hand rest over mine. When I didn't pull away. A line had already been crossed. It started over dinner. Or maybe, it started long before that. But that night, it boiled over. Derek had just come home from another long day. Shirt wrinkled, eyes distant. The same sigh he always gave before walking through the door. I asked if he'd thought more about what the doctor said. About trying IVF again. He barely touched his food. Then he looked up, and without warning, he said, "Why can't we just move on? Maybe this wasn't meant for us." I stared at him. That sentence. It felt like the final nail in something we never had the words to bury. Move on? I whispered. From what? From being parents? From hope. He rubbed his temples like my grief was exhausting. Like the weight I carried was something I should have set down by now. We've tried. You've tried, he said. Maybe we should be enough for each other. But we weren't. And the worst part was, we both knew it. I pushed back my chair. My appetite was gone. My voice small. Are you really okay never being a father? He didn't answer. And that silence. It shattered something in me. I went upstairs, shut the bedroom door behind me, and let the tears come. It wasn't just the fight. It was years of hoping, of waiting, of swallowing disappointment like medicine and telling myself tomorrow might be different. But it never was. And so, with shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I didn't plan what I'd say. I didn't think past the ring. I just knew. I couldn't hold this alone anymore. Malik answered on the second ring. I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. He just said, "Where are you?" And I whispered, "Home." 20 minutes later, he was standing at my door. No questions. No judgment. Just the kind of presence that lets you breathe again. I let him in. We didn't speak at first. I just leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, tears drying on my face. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He opened his arms, and I walked into them. We sat on the couch, the same one where I'd cried 100 times before, alone. But this time, I wasn't alone. We didn't sleep together. There was no rush, no hunger, no crossing of bodies. We just lay there, fully clothed, his hand holding mine like it was the only thread keeping me from unraveling. The house was quiet. The lights were low. My heart was still racing, but my body had finally stopped trembling. He turned to me, brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, and whispered, "Let me give you what you were meant to have." My breath caught in my throat, because in that moment, I wasn't just a woman grieving what never came. I wasn't just a wife watching her marriage dissolve in slow motion. I was something else. I was a possibility. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to live the rest of my life waiting at the edge of an empty crib. A few days passed, but the night on the couch with Malik didn't leave me. It lingered. Not as guilt, not even as regret, but as a strange kind of peace. The kind that comes when something heavy has finally landed, even if it landed in the wrong place. I told myself I wasn't deciding anything, that I was just exploring. So I made an appointment. A consultation with a clinic Malik had quietly recommended weeks before. Discreet, compassionate, no judgment. I didn't tell anyone, not even him at first. It felt too sacred. Too close to the part of me I'd buried beneath years of waiting and aching. But a few nights later, Malik came by. We sat on the porch. No wine, no games. Just quiet honesty between us. "I scheduled something," I said. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Steady. Soft. "Do you want me there?" he asked. I didn't answer. But the fact that he asked, that mattered more than I could explain. 2 mornings later, I slipped the confirmation slip into my purse and left it on the kitchen counter without thinking. I didn't notice Derek standing there when I walked back in. He had the paper in his hand, his fingers white around the edges, his face unreadable until it wasn't. "So you're just going to have another man's child?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was stunned. Empty. Without even telling me? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because what could I say? That I'd waited for him to see me? That I had begged God in the quiet corners of my heart for him to fight for us, and he never did? That I had grown tired of being a question no one answered? My silence filled the room. And it broke him. He dropped the paper, walked out the front door without another word. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't run after him. Later that evening, I told Malik what happened. He listened. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. "If this will destroy your marriage," he said, "I'll walk away. You don't owe me anything. You never did." His voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it. The kind that comes from loving someone quietly, in the background, and knowing you might be the wrong choice, even if you're the right answer. And I just sat there, because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if what I had left with Derek was still worth saving.